Chapter 64 Mazen. A long time ago, when Mazen had been a boy and his father had first told him the story of the lamp, he'd asked why, in all the years the lamp had existed, the royal family had never retrieved it. "Tell me, Mazen, do you know of a way to enter the sand sea?" Mazen had suggested a ship that dove into the sinking sand. His father had laughed, one of those rare, honest laughs that shook his whole body, and said, "What you suggest is magic, my son. You would need magic." Now, as Mazen wandered into the sand sea, he felt that magic gather on his skin like invisible dew. It hung like mist in the damp air and made the darkness before them shimmer. He would have been in awe if he hadn't been so anxious, because he had no idea what he was doing. But then his life had been out of his hands the moment he'd begun on this journey. Now his future had been burned to cinders, and his memories lay in the depths of a cavernous hole. Every time he stood at the edge of that pit, every time he thought of his father, of Hakim, it took all that he had to resist falling in and succumbing to his misery. So he did not ruminate. He followed blindly, all the while thinking, "This is all I have left." Eventually the dark tunnels widened into cavernous chambers filled with hills of blue-white sand. Rivers of sand cascaded down the walls from the darkness above them. The chamber was only the first of many impossible wonders. As they continued, the landscape grew increasingly more spectacular. Soon there were trees growing from the sand, and then entire forests, entire buildings. They passed through golden gates, couched between deity statues Mazen did not recognize, and stepped into what appeared to be an abandoned souk. To Mazen's left, pots of spices and nuts, a cart stacked high with fabrics that changed color and pattern, and iridescently glowing ceramics. To his right, glass lanterns filled with multicolored smoke, shattered mirrors that reflected his face with multiple expressions, and delicately decorated boxes of lokum. He shifted his gaze upward and gaped at the stall canopies, which shifted color before his eyes. Some were trimmed with intricate, shimmering gold patterns that moved fluidly like water. "Kadir," the merchant's voice was faint. "What is all this?" Kadir did not respond. He headed toward a copse of glittering fruit trees in the center of the souk. Mazen followed. His initial opinion of the apples was that they were oddly shaped, less round and more sharp. He reached for one of the lower hanging fruits and gasped aloud when his fingers brushed the surface. The fruit was made of glass. Kadir plucked an apple off the tree and bit into it without hesitation. Mazen could hear the sharp crunch of glass as the Ifrit chewed, but Kadir seemed unconcerned. He was smiling. "I grew up with these trees," he said. Though he was looking at Luli, his gaze was far away. "They only grew in the capital, and the fruit they bore was 5 times more expensive because it came from magic seeds." Mazen cautiously took a bite of the apple. He experienced the strange sensation of glass breaking between his teeth and melting into sugar on his tongue. He immediately took another bite. "Delicious" was a woefully inadequate description. Kadir wandered away, moving deeper into the empty souk. Luli immediately gave chase. Mazen followed after stuffing the rest of the apple into his mouth. "How is any of this down here?" Luli called. "Kadir." But Kadir was walking so quickly now that they had to run to keep up with him. He led them down twisted alleys and into thoroughfares taken up by extravagant buildings with stunning stained glass windows and shining gilded doors. And then, eventually, he stopped at a bridge made of solid gold. Mazen gasped for breath as he stopped beside him and looked up, 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 up. For on the other side of the bridge was a palace with such tall minarets they faded into the infinite darkness above them. The building was oddly blurry, its details undefined. A mirage? "Kadir!" Luli grabbed Kadir's arm, but the Ifrit just dragged her along as he stomped onto the bridge. She cast a desperate look over her shoulder, and Mazen rushed forward to grab his other arm. The Ifrit shoved them off with enough force to send them tumbling to the bridge. Living, beneath fire shone in his eyes as he whirled on them. "Do not touch me," he snapped, and his voice was so loud and deep it made the bridge rumble. The Ifrit turned and walked away, leaving them to stare at his back. "Something's wrong," Luli murmured. She rose and dusted off her robes. We need to follow him. They crossed the shining bridge and burst through the entrance. By the time they saw Kadir again, he'd reached the end of a dark corridor. Mazen continued to give chase until the merchant suddenly stopped and he had to skid to a halt to avoid crashing into her. He glanced over her shoulder. "What is it?" The merchant had slid the compass out of her pocket and was staring at it. The arrow was quivering, pointing to an archway farther down the corridor. Luli frowned. "The lamp?" The arrow shuddered in response. She bit her lip. "I can't lose Kadir." "But the lamp?" "I'll find it." Mazen tried to smile but was too nervous to lift the corners of his lips. Luli's expression lightened as she led him down the corridor to the archway designated by the compass. Mazen was overwhelmed by the sight inside. It was a treasure chamber, the fullest, most impressive treasure chamber he'd ever laid eyes on. The floor was impossible to see beneath mountains of gold. The tops were lost to darkness. Glittering jewels and lavish artifacts lay scattered atop piles as if they were mere trinkets. It was a staggering sight, like something out of one of his mother's stories. Luli breathed out softly. "Damn. What is this place?" Mazen mumbled. "Is all of this real?" "That is what I intend to ask Kadir." Luli hesitated, then shoved the compass into his hands. "I'll be back, but if I don't return soon, use the compass to find us." She turned and bolted through the corridor they had just come from. Mazen faced the mounds of treasure. He followed the compass to a corner of the room drenched in sunlight that, as far as he could tell, came from the emptiness above him. He tucked the relic away and began sifting through the mound, which certainly felt real beneath his hands. Treasure slid through his fingers as he searched. But then, eventually, he found what he was looking for, a simple copper oil lamp. He plucked it from the pile with trembling hands. Was this small, unspectacular thing truly what they'd been looking for all this time? It didn't feel like a relic. He tilted it one way and then the other. Then nothing happened. He opened the lid and peered inside. It was empty. He rubbed at the body, thinking that perhaps instructions had been inscribed onto the surface beneath the dirt. But there was nothing. The lamp was just that, a lamp. Chapter 65. Luli. Trying to stop Kadir was like trying to move a boulder. It was impossible. Luli tried to break him out of his trance by yelling his name, but Kadir never seemed to see her. She followed him down dark corridors and through chambers filled with ancient furniture. They passed chests made of solid gold, beautifully colored tile-top tables, mounted weapons with hilts of precious jade and silver, glass cabinets filled with tiny, moving porcelain creatures, and Kadir never so much as blinked or questioned where they were. She slid the two-faced coin out of her pocket. Is Kadir possessed? She flipped the coin. The jinn side came up. No. Is he being influenced by magic? The Sultan's face frowned up at her. Yes. When she looked up, they were in a chamber similar to the one they'd first entered, only it was not so much a room as an endless stalagmite-filled landscape with no apparent end. Blue and white sand trickled down the spires, pooling on the ground like water. A flicker of motion caught her eye as she looked down to see her own reflection gaping at her on the ground. What in the ninth hells is this place? She tucked the coin away and pulled out Kadir's dagger, eyeing the space cautiously as they advanced. She did not like this place with the strange reflective sand that mirrored her fear at her from various angles. Even more alarming, when she glanced over her shoulder, she saw that the entrance and exit to the room had vanished. Panic hummed through her veins. What kind of magic is this? Kadir stopped. Luli nearly ran into his back. She paused, heart thundering in her chest as she moved to stand in front of him. Kadir? Kalila. His voice broke on the name. She blinked, followed his gaze to a hill of sand about a mile away. At first she saw nothing out of the ordinary, just endlessly falling sand on their own reflections staring at them from a distance. But then she realized one of the reflections was a solid person, a brown-skinned woman with a nest of braids trailing down her back. Kalila. Luli recognized the name. It was the name of the jinn in the compass. Kadir brushed past her, eyes trained on the jinn with a desperation that made panic bubble in her chest. This was an illusion. It had to be. Or a distraction. But from what? That was when she heard the whistle and saw a flash of red in the air, and then pain in her cheek, blood dribbling down her chin. Kadir! She shoved him out of the way as another arrow whizzed past his face. Kadir stumbled, turned, and blinked. His gaze sharpened. The invisible archer gave them no time to think. Another arrow came, and then another and another, until the air was full of them. Kadir moved sluggishly, raising his hand and conjuring a wall of fire to burn the incoming projectiles. Only the arrows burst through the flames undeterred. One caught Luli's sleeve, another grazed her leg. Kadir caught one arrow in the shoulder, another in the stomach, and the last in his chest. Luli cried out as he collapsed to his knees, ash dripping down his face. She crouched beside him as his fire burned low and disappeared, and stared in horror at the silver blood running from his wounds. The arrows were crafted from iron. She heard laughter, slow and mocking. Well, that was disappointing. She turned to see a man with a wide, shiny smile approaching. He walked with his bow strung, arrow nocked, and pointed at Kadir. "Don't move, merchant." The archer paused feet away and made a sweeping gesture with his hand. Another figure approached. A heartbeat later, Aisha bint Luwas stood behind Kadir, her sword at his neck. "Immortal you may be, Ifrit, but even you need time to heal." Rage, dark and twisting, burned through Luli's heart. Aisha's expression was utterly impassive. She raised her brows. "Salam al-Nazari." "Traitor," Luli spat. The man laughed. "Traitor? Who did you think she was working for? We are the 40 Thieves. We serve one man and one man alone." Luli stared at the stranger. The thief with the iron arrows clearly meant to disable Jinn. And then she glanced at Aisha, who stood patiently behind Kadir, waiting. They were both waiting. Omar, she thought, heart sinking. Omar bin Malik was here.